Now, the next part of the properties of sine and cosine graphs is this thing in front of the x being applied directly to the x. And you remember that all the other properties, this is a shift basically of the graph, right or left, and that's basically what happens here. It's hard to see, but when you have this thing affects what we call the period. Now remember, the period of a graph, a sine or cosine graph, is where it completes itself. And the period for a sine graph is 360 degrees. That's where it completes one full cycle, up, down, and then back to the beginning, sort of the starting point. And for the cosine, the period is 360 degrees as well. So both these graphs complete themselves at 360 degrees. It's the interval at which the graph repeats itself. So that's where it completes. It completes itself. Right? Now, what happens when the number that is applied to the x is, for example, a 2? If you take a look at the graph is now completing itself at 180 degrees. In other words, there's two cycles that happen between 0 and 360. There's two complete waves of the graph between 0 and 360, or it halves itself. So if you take a look, that 2 then tells you that you've got two cycles from 0 to 360. And the period has changed. The period of the graph is now no longer 360, it's 180 degrees. It's now completing itself half the distance. Now there's a formula, again, that can be used, which is very, very useful, and it's this. Since we know that the period of any sine and cosine graph is normally at 360, if we divide that by whatever b is, we can then get the new period of the graph. So in this case, if we take 360 and we divide it by 2, we get 180. And that tells us where the new period is for the graph. Now, if you don't know what b is, and sometimes you won't, if you just know that it's there, y is equal to sine bx, and you've got to find out what b is, then you're going to have to rearrange this basic formula. So now you have to rearrange it for b, so you multiply by b and you rearrange this thing and you get b is equal to, if you're not convinced, over b is equal to the period. So we're going to get b times times, so you're just going to get 360 over the period. So if you know what the period is, if you know from the graph it stops at 180, then 360 divided by 180 is equal to 2. So that tells you what b is. So you can do the rearranging and you can actually find what that is, as long as you know where the graph completes itself and stops.